The bridge of the Imperial Dreadnought. Sovereign's Wrath. Hummed with the quiet efficiency of a 1,000-year empire at its peak. Admiral Zexathyra adjusted her ceremonial scales, the bioluminescent patterns along her serpentine neck pulsing. With barely contained irritation. 300 cycles she had served the Galactic Empire, and never once had a first contact mission gone this sideways. "Report," she hissed, her forked tongue tasting the recycled air that carried hints of fear pheromones from her bridge crew. Commander Velkoth, a hulking insectoid with compound eyes that reflected the bridge's amber lighting, clicked his mandibles nervously. "Admiral, the human vessel, it's not responding to our standard surrender protocols." "Of course it isn't." Zexthyra's tail lashed against her command throne. "These mammals probably don't even understand basic galactic law. Show me their pathetic ship again." The main view screen flickered to life, displaying what could generously be called a spacecraft. The human vessel looked like someone had welded scrap metal together in a junkyard, then painted it matte black and called it a day. No elegant curves like proper Zephyrian architecture. No crystal resonance chambers like the wise ethereals preferred. Just angles, lots of sharp, uncomfortable angles. "Scans indicate it's barely 300 meters long," reported Lieutenant Kixara from the sensor station, her 4 arms dancing across holographic displays. "Primitive fusion drive, no discernible shielding technology, single energy signature. Suggests..." "Wait." Her voice faltered. "Admiral, I'm reading some kind of weapon system, but the configuration doesn't match any known galactic standard." Zexthyra's laugh was like silk sliding over razor blades. "Weapons? On that rust bucket? They probably mounted mining lasers and think they can threaten the Empire." She straightened in her throne, scales shifting to display confidence patterns. "Open a channel. Let's educate these newcomers about their place in the galaxy." The view screen split, showing both the human ship and, moments later, the interior of what appeared to be its bridge. Zexathyra had seen many species make first contact with the Empire. Some wept. Some begged. Some tried to bargain. The human sitting in what passed for a captain's chair did none of these things. He was unremarkable. Brown hair going gray at the temples, skin the color of weak tea, small eyes that seemed almost sleepy. He wore what looked like a simple blue uniform with minimal decoration. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost conversational. "This is Captain Marcus Chen of the UES Persistence. You folks seem to have a lot of ships pointed in our direction." Zexthyra blinked all 4 eyes in succession. Was this mammal making small talk? "I am Admiral Zexthyra of the Galactic Empire. You have entered Imperial space without authorization. Surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded." Captain Chen nodded thoughtfully as if she had just commented on the weather. "Yeah, about that. See, we're not actually looking for trouble. We're explorers, not conquerors. But we've got a problem. The only problem here is your failure to comply with Imperial law." Zexathyra's scales flashed warning colors. "Surrender now, or face the consequences." Chen's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked tired. "The problem is that you've got 17 warships surrounding one exploration vessel, and you're making demands. Now in human space, we call that piracy, and Admiral..." He paused, meeting her gaze through the screen. "We really don't like pirates." The bridge of the Sovereign's Wrath fell silent except for the ambient hum of systems. Zexathyra felt her secondary heart skip a beat. Was this primitive actually threatening the Empire? "Commander Velkoth," she said without taking her eyes off the human captain. "Charge weapons. Let's show these mammals what happens to those who defy the Empire." "Weapons charging, Admiral," Velkoth replied, relief evident in his clicking voice. Finally, something that made sense. On the screen, Captain Chen sighed. "Well, that's unfortunate." He turned to someone off-screen. "Sarah, arm the equalizer." "Captain," came a female voice tinged with what sounded like excitement. "Are you sure? We haven't field-tested it yet." "Field test it now." Zexthyra's laugh was sharp and predatory. "Did you hear that, crew? They have one weapon system, and they haven't even tested it. The bridge erupted in hissing, clicking, and chittering laughter from a dozen different species. Fire a warning shot across their bow. Let's see how brave these humans are when every screen on the bridge went white. Not the brilliant white of an explosion, but the pure, clean white of every photon detector, being overwhelmed simultaneously. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the bridge in deep red. When the main screens finally flickered back to life, they showed nothing. Where the human ship had been, there was just empty space and the slowly dissipating remains of what had once been the IDS Retribution, a heavy cruiser that had been positioned directly behind the human vessel. "Report!" Zex Thyra's voice cracked like a whip. "Admiral." Lieutenant Kixara's voice was barely a whisper. "The Retribution is gone, completely vaporized. I'm reading trace particles consistent with complete molecular disassembly. Where's the human ship?" "Unknown, Admiral. They just vanished." Zexathyra stared at the empty space where two ships had been moments before. A heavy cruiser, gone in an instant. No debris, no energy signature. Just gone. "Admiral." Commander Velkoth's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "What are your orders?" Before she could answer, every communication system on the ship activated simultaneously. Captain Chen's face appeared on every screen, his expression still, maddeningly calm. "Admiral Zex Thyra," he said, "I think we need to talk." Audiobook, Chapter 2. The thing about humans, Admiral Zex Thyra's scales had shifted to deep purple, a color that, in Zephyrian biology, indicated both confusion and the early stages of genuine terror. She forced them back to neutral tones through sheer willpower, but the damage was done. Her crew had seen their admiral show fear. "How are you transmitting?" she demanded. "Our sensors show no ships in this sector." Captain Chen's image smiled, an expression that on most species indicated friendliness but on humans somehow managed to look predatory. "Admiral, we need to establish some ground rules. First, you're going to recall your remaining ships to a safe distance. Then we're going to have a conversation about why humanity just became the galaxy's newest problem. You destroyed an Imperial vessel." Zex Thyra's voice rose to a shriek. "That's an act of war." "Actually?" came the female voice from before, Sarah apparently. "We didn't destroy anything, we relocated it." The view screen shifted, showing a tactical display. There, some 50,000 kilometers away, sat the IDS Retribution, completely intact but now surrounded by what appeared to be a perfect sphere of crystallized spacetime. "Your cruiser is fine," Captain Chen continued. "Crew's probably a bit dizzy, but they'll recover. The temporal stasis field will dissipate in about 6 hours. Consider it a demonstration." Commander Velkoth leaned close to Zexathira's throne. "Admiral, our long-range sensors confirm it. The Retribution is intact, but frozen. We're detecting no energy signatures from the vessel at all." Zexathira's world tilted. Temporal manipulation was theoretical even for the Empire's greatest scientists. The energy requirements alone should have been impossible for a ship that small. "What do you want?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "To talk. See, we've been watching your empire for about 3 months now. Very impressive organization you've got. 17,000 member species, spanning 43% of the galaxy. Really quite remarkable." The Admiral's blood went cold. 3 months. They'd been observing the Empire for 3 months without detection? That's impossible. "Our sensor networks are very good at detecting conventional faster-than-light travel," Captain Chen interrupted. "But they're not designed to spot ships moving through folded space-time. Different technology entirely." Dr. Thysic, the ship's chief science officer, a crystalline being whose thought processes were visible as light patterns within his translucent body, suddenly blazed with urgent blue frequencies. "Admiral," his voice resonated like singing crystal, "if they have mastered dimensional folding, then they can go anywhere in the galaxy instantly." Zexathyra finished. "Without using the hyperspace lanes, without being detected." "That's about the size of it," Captain Chen confirmed. "Now here's where things get interesting. We've identified 17 separate species within your empire that are there against their will. Conquered peoples, essentially. That bothers us. Zexthyra's laugh was bitter. Bothers you? Child, the Empire has maintained peace for over a millennium through strength. Those worlds are better off under our protection. See, that's where we disagree. The captain's tone remained conversational, but something in his eyes had changed. Humans have a saying. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. A fellow named Benjamin Franklin said that, about 400 years ago. Primitive philosophy from a primitive species. Zexthyra spat. Maybe. But here's the thing about humans, Admiral. We're really, really good at two things: adapting and breaking stuff we don't like. The view screen shifted again, this time showing the Persistence as it materialized just a few hundred meters from the Sovereign's wrath. The human ship was wrong. Not just ugly, but fundamentally wrong in ways that hurt to look at. Its angles seemed to bend space around them, and occasionally parts of the ship appeared to flicker in and out of existence. That ship, Dr. Thysic whispered, his crystal form now pulsing with rapid, panicked light patterns. It exists in at least 7 dimensions simultaneously. 12, actually, Sarah's voice corrected cheerfully. We're still working on the 13th, but the math is tricky. Zexthyra found her voice. What are you? Captain Chen's expression grew serious. We're the species that discovered faster-than-light travel by accident while trying to make better coffee. We're the people who solved the unified field theory, because one of our physicists got bored during a commercial break. We're the civilization that achieved dimensional transcendence because a grad student made a math error that turned out to be right. He paused, letting that sink in. Admiral, your empire maintains control through superior technology and overwhelming force. But you've never encountered a species that treats the laws of physics as suggestions. Lieutenant Kixara's forearms were trembling as she worked her console. Admiral, she reported, voice shaking, I'm detecting massive gravitational anomalies around their ship. It's as if reality itself is being rewritten in a sphere around them. That's just the coffee machine warming up, Sarah commented. The bridge fell silent except for the increasingly rapid clicking of Commander Velkoth's mandibles, an insectoid stress response. Captain Chen leaned forward slightly. Now, Admiral, let's discuss terms. Terms? For humanity's integration into galactic society. See, we're not unreasonable. We understand you've got a system that works for you. But we're going to need some changes made. Zexthyra's scales began shifting through rapid color changes, confusion, anger, fear, back to confusion. You're dictating terms to the Galactic Empire? More like offering suggestions, with the understanding that if you don't take them, things might get unpleasant. Are you threatening us? Captain Chen's smile returned, and this time Zexthyra was certain it was predatory. Admiral, if we were threatening you, this conversation would already be over. The view screen flickered, showing tactical displays from across the Empire. Dozens of worlds, hundreds of fleets, all of them with small, impossible human ships sitting just outside detection range. How long have you been there? Zexthyra whispered. 3 months, Captain Chen replied. We're very patient and very thorough. The Admiral of the mightiest fleet in galactic history found herself asking the question she'd never thought she'd need to ask. What do you want us to do? On Chapter 3, The Galactic Paradigm Shift. The emergency session of the Imperial High Council convened within hours of Admiral Zexthyra's initial report. Representatives from across the galaxy materialized as holographic projections in the grand chamber of Nyx Prime, the Empire's capital world. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, a sphere of pure crystal suspended in the heart of a dying star, its walls inscribed with the laws that had governed galactic civilization for over 1,000 years. Grand Chancellor Morden, an ancient being whose species had transcended physical form eons ago, manifested as a shifting pattern of geometric light. When he spoke, reality itself seemed to listen. Admiral Zexthyra, his voice resonated from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Your report strains credibility. You claim a single primitive vessel disabled one of our heavy cruisers without firing a shot? Zexithyra's holographic projection flickered as she transmitted from her flagship. Her scales had settled into a mottled pattern of deep purples and grays, colors that in Zephyrian biology indicated profound unease. Grand Chancellor, I have visual confirmation, sensor logs, and the testimony of 400 crew members. The human ship exists in 12 dimensions simultaneously. They have mastered temporal manipulation, dimensional folding, and what can only be described as selective reality revision. Impossible, declared War Prime Kethvar, the Empire's supreme military commander. The massive Urakian's forearms gestured dismissively, his rock-like hide scarred from centuries of battle. No species achieves such technological advancement without leaving traces. Our intelligence networks span the galaxy. Which is why, interrupted a new voice, calm and conversational, you never saw us coming. Every being in the chamber froze, as Captain Marcus Chen materialized, not as a hologram but physically present in the center of the sacred space. Beside him stood a woman with short brown hair and intense green eyes, wearing the same simple blue uniform. I'm Sarah Kim, the woman said, looking around the chamber with obvious curiosity. Theoretical physicist, practical engineer, and the person who's been reverse engineering your technology for the past 3 months. She pulled out what appeared to be a standard Imperial communication device and casually tossed it in the air, where it froze and began slowly rotating. Nice work. On the quantum entanglement protocols, by the way. Very elegant. The chamber erupted in chaos. Energy weapons materialized from hidden panels. Security barriers of hardened light snapped into existence. Temporal stasis fields activated to freeze the intruders in place. Nothing happened. Captain Chen stood calmly in the center of a sphere of writhing energy and distorted spacetime, completely unaffected. Grand Chancellor Morden, he said, apparently reading from a small device. Third-order transcendent being, age approximately 47,000 standard years, inventor of the Imperial Peace Doctrine. War Prime Kethvar, last of the Urakian, battle philosophers, conqueror of the Spiral Arm Rebellion. Fleet Admiral Zexithyra, actually, we've met. He looked around the chamber with mild interest. Impressive gathering. Mind if we sit down? This might take a while. 2 chairs materialized from what appeared to be folded space. Chen and Kim sat down as if they were attending a pleasant tea party rather than facing the most powerful beings in known space. Grand Chancellor Morden's geometric patterns shifted to configurations that hadn't been seen in millennia. Colors beyond the visible spectrum that somehow conveyed concepts like impossibility and paradigm breakdown. How did you breach our security? He demanded. We didn't, Sarah replied cheerfully. We've been here for about 20 minutes. Time dilation field. To you, we just arrived. To us, we've been watching your entire emergency session. Fascinating debate about whether to launch a preemptive strike, by the way. War Prime Kethvar's hide began glowing with battle rage. If you've been listening to our classified deliberations, War Prime, Captain Chen interrupted gently, you're thinking about this wrong. The question isn't how we got here or how we've been monitoring your empire for months without detection. The question is, what happens next? The view screen that dominated one wall of the chamber flickered to life, showing tactical displays from across the galaxy. Hundreds of Imperial worlds, thousands of fleets, and at each location, the impossible outline of human vessels that somehow existed without registering on any known sensor array. We've been very patient, Chen continued. We've studied your laws, your cultures, your history. We understand that the Empire has maintained stability for over 1,000 years. That's genuinely impressive. But, Sarah added, stability achieved through conquest and maintained through the threat of overwhelming force isn't really peace, it's just paused violence. Fleet Admiral Zexithyra's projection flickered with agitation. The Empire protects thousands of species. Without our strength, the galaxy would descend into chaos. Maybe, Chen acknowledged. But that's not really your decision to make, is it? At least not anymore. The chamber fell silent except for the low hum of reality being continuously rewritten around the two humans. Grand Chancellor Morden's form solidified into something more recognizable, still geometric light, but configured in patterns that suggested deep thought. "What do you propose?" "Simple," Sarah said, producing what looked like a standard data tablet. "We've prepared a list of suggested modifications to your governmental structure. Nothing too dramatic. Just some adjustments to make things more fair." The tablet multiplied, somehow becoming dozens of identical devices that materialized in front of each council member. As they examined the contents, the chamber filled with various species-specific expressions of shock. "You want us to grant independence to every conquered world?" War Prime Kethvar's voice was barely controlled rage. "Eventually," Chen agreed. "We understand these things take time. But within 10 standard years, every species currently under Imperial rule should have the choice to remain or leave. No coercion, no economic pressure, just choice. And if they choose to leave, they take their resources with them," Sarah added. "Their worlds, their minerals, their strategic locations. Everything." "The Empire would collapse," protested Council Speaker Vithara, a delicate crystalline being whose thoughts created beautiful fractal patterns in the air around her. "Our economy, our trade networks, our military, everything depends on the integrated structure we've built." "Then you'll need to rebuild," Chen said simply. "But this time you'll do it through cooperation instead of conquest." Grand Chancellor Morden's patterns had shifted to deep contemplation modes. "And if we refuse?" Sarah and Chen exchanged glances. It was Sarah who answered, her voice still cheerful but somehow carrying undertones that made reality itself seem less stable. "Well, that would be unfortunate. See, humans have a really bad habit of taking things apart when we don't like how they work. And Grand Chancellor," she smiled, and the smile somehow managed to be more terrifying than any weapon, "we really don't like oppression." The tactical display shifted, showing human vessels moving from passive observation to active positioning. Ships that existed in 12 dimensions began manifesting energy signatures that registered as impossible on Imperial sensors. "But surely," Fleet Admiral Zexthyra interjected, desperation creeping into her voice, "you can't dismantle an empire spanning half the galaxy without causing chaos. Billions would die in the transition." "Which is why we're giving you 10 years, Chen replied. "Time to plan, time to adjust, time to figure out how to maintain beneficial relationships with your former subjects without the whole conquest angle." "And we'll help," Sarah added brightly. "Human engineers are really good at solving problems. We can help you redesign your economic systems, develop new technologies that don't require subjugation, maybe even teach you some of our dimensional manipulation techniques." War Prime Kethvar leaned forward, his massive form radiating skepticism. "And what guarantee do we have that humans won't simply replace the Empire with their own version of galactic dominance?" Captain Chen's expression grew serious. "Because, War Prime, humans learned something important about 400 years ago. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. We've structured our society specifically to prevent the kind of concentration of authority that makes empires possible. Besides," Sarah added with a grin, "we're terrible at governing. We can barely manage our own planets without arguing constantly. The last thing we want is to be responsible for running the galaxy." The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The most powerful empire in galactic history was being politely asked to dismantle itself by a species that claimed they didn't want the job of replacing it. Grand Chancellor Morden's patterns shifted through configurations that hadn't been seen since the Empire's founding. Finally, he spoke. "And if we comply with your suggestion, what then? What prevents another aggressive species from simply taking our place?" Sarah's grin widened. "Oh, that's the best part. See, we're not just talking to you. We're having similar conversations with every potentially aggressive species in the galaxy. The Vex Collective, the Harbinger States, the Crimson Hegemony, all of them are getting the same message. The age of galactic empires," Captain Chen said quietly, "is over. Chapter 4, The New Equilibrium. 6 months later, Admiral Zexthyra, now calling herself Coordinator Zexthyra of the Zephyrian Independent Systems, stood on the observation deck of her former flagship, watching as the Sovereign's Wrath was slowly converted from a dreadnought into a research vessel. The weapon systems had been replaced with laboratories. The hangar bays now held exploration shuttles instead of fighters. The Imperial insignia had been carefully removed and replaced with the new symbol of the Galactic Cooperation Initiative, a simple spiral representing growth rather than conquest. Strange how quickly things change, she mused aloud. Not that quickly, replied Captain Chen, materializing beside her with the casual disregard for physics that humans seem to treat as normal. Your people adapted faster than most. The Urakians are still arguing about the color of their new flag. Zexthyra's scales shifted to display wry amusement. War Prime Kethvar always was stubborn. How goes the transition on the core worlds? Better than expected. Turns out a lot of species were only staying in the Empire because they were afraid of what would happen if they left. Once they realized the threats were gone, Chen shrugged. Choice is a powerful thing. Through the viewport they could see one of the new phenomena that had emerged in the past months, a human construction. It looked like a space station that had been designed by someone who understood physics but didn't feel obligated to follow all of its rules. Impossible geometries folded in on themselves, creating structures that were simultaneously larger and smaller than they appeared. What is that thing? Zexthyra asked, not for the first time. Community center? Chen replied casually. The ethereals wanted somewhere to conduct their philosophical debates. The insectoids needed a place for their new collective art projects, and the crystalline hierarchies requested space for their musical compositions. So Sarah designed a multi-dimensional meeting hall that exists in whatever configuration is most comfortable for whoever's using it at the time. That's impossible. So were humans, apparently. But here we are. They watched in comfortable silence as a group of former Imperial species worked together on what appeared to be a massive terraforming project. Worlds that had been strip-mined for the Empire's benefit were being restored, not by Imperial decree, but by voluntary cooperation between species who had chosen to work together. I have to ask, Zexthyra said eventually. What would you have done if we'd refused? Really? Chen was quiet for a long moment. Honestly? We were hoping you wouldn't call our bluff. Bluff? Oh, we could have dismantled the Empire by force. The technology exists. But Sarah ran the calculations and the social disruption would have been catastrophic. Billions of beings suddenly cut loose from the only governmental structure they'd ever known. With no transition plan, it would have been chaos. Zexthyra's scales shifted to deep thoughtfulness. So you were gambling that we'd choose cooperation over conflict, not gambling, hoping. There's a difference. Chen smiled. Humans are optimists, Admiral. Sorry, Coordinator. We tend to believe that most beings, given the choice between fear and hope, will choose hope. And if you'd been wrong, then we'd have had to live with the consequences. But we weren't wrong, were we? Before Zexthyra could respond, her communicator chimed with an incoming message. She activated it, and the holographic form of Dr. Thysek appeared, his crystalline structure blazing with excitement. Coordinator, the human physicist Dr. Kim has agreed to collaborate on our dimensional resonance project. She says she can show us how to fold space-time to create musical harmonies that exist in 7 dimensions simultaneously. Zexthyra looked at Chen with something that might have been exasperation. Your people are insane. Probably, he agreed cheerfully, but we're useful. The communication continued, with Dr. Thysek babbling about theoretical breakthroughs and artistic possibilities that would have been dismissed as fantasy just months before. In the background, Zexthyra could hear the sounds of multiple species working together, arguing cheerfully about technical details and aesthetic choices. There is something I've been wondering about, she said when the call ended. Why did you approach us first? Why not the smaller powers or the oppressed species themselves? Chen considered the question seriously. Because dismantling power structures from the bottom up takes centuries and usually involves a lot of violence. But if you can convince the people at the top that change is inevitable, that it's better to guide the transformation than be swept away by it, he shrugged. Sometimes you can achieve in months what might otherwise take generations. And if we'd been different, if we'd been truly committed to maintaining the empire through violence, then, said a new voice, we'd have had to get creative. Sarah Kim materialized next to Chen, her arms full of what appeared to be blueprints for something that hurt to look at directly. Creative how? Zexathyra asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Sarah's grin was cheerfully terrifying. Oh, we had backup plans. Temporal loops that would trap Imperial fleets in recursive time streams. Dimensional mazes that would redirect invasion forces to pocket universes. Reality viruses that would make Imperial weapons forget how to work. She paused thoughtfully. My personal favorite was the one where we'd replace all Imperial communications with interpretive dance, but the Ethics Committee vetoed that. Ethics Committee? Humans, Chen explained, have learned to be very careful about the difference between can do and should do. It's kept us from accidentally destroying ourselves. Mostly. Zexathyra's scales had gone completely pale. You have weapons that can rewrite reality. We have tools that can rewrite reality, Sarah corrected. Whether they're weapons depends entirely on how they're used. Through the viewport, they watched as another impossible human construction materialized. This one apparently designed as a mobile hospital that could exist in multiple star systems simultaneously, providing medical care to species across the galaxy regardless of distance. The thing is, Chen continued, humans figured out a long time ago that the most powerful weapon isn't the one that can destroy the most things. It's the one that can create the most possibilities. And what? Zexathyra asked quietly. Do you do with a species that doesn't want possibilities? That prefers the certainty of oppression to the uncertainty of freedom? Sarah and Chen exchanged glances. It was Sarah who answered. We give them time, and we give them examples, and eventually most of them come around. Her expression grew serious. The ones that don't, well, that's why we maintain the monitoring stations. Monitoring stations? Hidden throughout the galaxy, Chen explained, keeping watch for anyone who might try to rebuild the old Empire model, just in case. Zexathyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. And if someone does try, then we have another conversation, Sarah said simply. Usually it's sufficient. The implications hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. The humans weren't conquerors in the traditional sense, but they were, gardeners perhaps, tending the galaxy, pruning back anything that grew too aggressive, nurturing cooperation and growth. How many of you are there? Zexathyra asked. How many human ships are really out there? Chen smiled. Coordinator, that's probably not the right question. What is? The right question is, how many do there need to be? Before she could ask for clarification, the space around them began to shimmer. New arrivals were folding into normal space, not human ships this time, but vessels from dozens of species, former Imperial subjects arriving for the first Galactic Cooperation Summit. And that, Sarah said with satisfaction, is why we're optimists. Epilogue: The Long Game. 2 years after first contact, Captain Marcus Chen sat in what had once been the Grand Chancellor's private study on Nix Prime, now converted into a coffee shop of all things. The walls still bore the inscribed laws of the old empire, but someone had added cheerful murals depicting various species working together on impossible projects. A crystalline hierarchist was playing what sounded like 12-dimensional jazz, while an insectoid collective painted a portrait of the music itself. Sarah Kim materialized in the chair across from him, looking pleased with herself. How'd it go? Chen asked, not looking up from his tablet. The Harbinger states have agreed to the non-aggression compact, she reported, stealing his coffee and taking a sip. Turns out, when you demonstrate that their unstoppable war fleets can be relocated to the other side of the galaxy without Damaging them? They become very interested in diplomacy. And the Vex Collective? Still arguing among themselves about whether cooperation is mathematically optimal. Give them another few months. Sarah grinned. I may have helped by introducing them to some new chaos theory that suggests collaborative systems are more stable than hierarchical ones. Chen finally looked up. Please tell me you didn't break their entire mathematical framework just to make a point. Only a little bit. They'll rebuild it stronger. Through the window, they could see the transformation of Nyx Prime continuing. The crystal palaces of the former imperial nobility were being converted into universities and research centers. Former military installations had become cultural exchange centers. The entire planet was slowly becoming something unprecedented in galactic history, a truly cooperative society. Any word from the monitoring stations? Chen asked. 3 minor incidents this quarter. A small empire forming in the outer spiral tried to conquer their neighbors. Some quick temporal displacement convinced them to try trade agreements instead. The Crimson hegemony tested whether our response time had gotten slower. It hadn't. And there was that amusing situation with the Metallic Confederacy thinking they could build a superweapon. Amusing how? Sarah's grin widened. I may have convinced their entire weapons development program that the laws of physics work differently than they thought. They're now building what they think are doomsday devices that actually turn out to be really efficient water purification systems. Chen shook his head. Sarah, one of these days someone's going to realize that half our impossible technology is just you convincing reality to behave differently. Reality is very suggestible, she replied cheerfully. Besides, it's working, isn't it? It was working. The galactic transformation had exceeded even humanity's optimistic projections. Trade was flourishing. Art and science were advancing at unprecedented rates as species shared knowledge freely, rather than hoarding it for military advantage. Even former imperial hardliners were starting to admit that cooperation might be more effective than conquest. There is one thing bothering me, Chen said after a moment. What's that? What happens when we're gone? Humans don't live forever, and our technology isn't self-maintaining. What happens to all this when the galaxy doesn't have us looking over its shoulder anymore? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying the peaceful scene outside the window. Finally, she spoke. Marcus, what do you think we've really been doing for the past 2 years? Preventing the formation of aggressive empires through superior technology and the occasional demonstration of force. No, she said softly. We've been teaching. Chen looked puzzled, so she continued. Every species we've worked with has learned something about cooperation, about the benefits of voluntary association over forced compliance, about the power of shared knowledge versus hoarded secrets. She gestured toward the window. Look at them, Marcus. They're not cooperating because they're afraid of us. They're cooperating because they've discovered it works better. But the technology will eventually be shared. Not all of it. Not the really dangerous stuff, but enough. Enough for them to maintain what they've built. Enough for them to continue growing, Chen frowned. And if someone develops their own version of our reality manipulation technology? What if they use it for conquest instead of cooperation? Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. Then they'll discover what we discovered, which is that the universe has a sense of humor. She leaned back in her chair, which somehow managed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously without spilling her coffee. Marcus, do you know why human technology works the way it does? Why we can fold space-time and manipulate reality while other species are still struggling with basic, faster-than-light travel? Because we're lucky? Because we're chaotic. Sarah smiled. Every other species in the galaxy develops technology through careful, logical progression, step-by-step building on established principles. But humans? We make intuitive leaps. We try things that shouldn't work. We make mistakes that turn out to be breakthroughs. She gestured around them at the impossible architecture of the coffee shop where gravity seemed to be more of a suggestion than a law. The universe responds to chaos, Marcus, to creativity, to the willingness to try something new without knowing if it will work. That's not something you can conquer with, it's something you have to nurture. Chen considered this. So you're saying that anyone who tries to use our technology for oppression will find it doesn't work? I'm saying the universe has already chosen sides, Sarah replied. And it's chosen creativity over control, cooperation over conquest, growth over stagnation. We didn't impose that on the galaxy, Marcus. We just helped everyone else discover it. As if to prove her point, a group of young beings from various species ran past the window, chasing what appeared to be a small, dimensional anomaly that sparkled like a soap bubble. They were laughing in a dozen different ways, their joy transcending species barriers. The next generation, Chen observed. The first generation, Sarah corrected. The first to grow up in a galaxy where cooperation is normal, where diversity is celebrated, where the idea of conquest seems as archaic as, well, as the old empire. Chen's tablet chimed with an incoming message. He glanced at it and smiled. Speaking of the old empire, I just got a report from Zexathyra. The Zephyrian independent systems have successfully terraformed 3 worlds using cooperative labor from 7 different species. They're asking if we'd like to attend the celebration. That's nice, Sarah said, but she was looking out the window again, her expression distant. What are you thinking about? The future, she replied. In about 50 years, when the species of the galaxy have fully adapted to the new paradigm, what do you think they'll remember about humanity? Chen considered the question seriously. That we prevented a lot of wars? That we helped establish the Cooperation Initiative? Sarah shook her head. They'll remember that we proved change was possible. That empires don't last forever. That there's always another way. She stood up, finishing his coffee with a satisfied smile. And maybe, if we're really lucky, they'll remember that the most important technology isn't the one that destroys things or controls things. What is it? The one that creates possibilities. With that, she stepped sideways into a fold in space-time and vanished, leaving only the faint scent of coffee and the lingering echo of 12-dimensional jazz. Chen sat alone in the coffee shop that had once been the seat of galactic power, watching as the universe continued its patient work of becoming something better than it had been. Outside, representatives from hundreds of species were arriving for another cooperation summit, bringing with them new ideas, new technologies, and new ways of solving old problems. His tablet chimed again. This time it was a message from humanity's home worlds, asking when he planned to return. The message made him smile. Even after everything they'd accomplished, humans still couldn't resist the urge to tinker, to explore, to find new problems to solve. But for now, the galaxy was in good hands. Not human hands. That had never been the goal. In its own hands, finally learning to work together instead of against each other. Chen stood up, left payment for his coffee in the form of a small device that would probably revolutionize local agriculture, and walked out into the transformed capital of what had once been the most powerful empire in galactic history. Behind him, the laws inscribed on the coffee shop walls began to shimmer and change, ancient edicts about conquest and control slowly being replaced by newer words about cooperation and growth. The universe, it seemed, was still editing itself. And somewhere in the space between dimensions, Sarah Kim was probably working on her next impossible project, humming along to 12-dimensional jazz and getting ready to teach reality a few new tricks. The age of empires was over. The age of possibilities had just begun. Final note from the personal log of Captain Marcus Chen, UES Persistence. Galactic Standard Year 2387. Today marks the 2nd anniversary of what the historians are calling the Peaceful Revolution, though Sarah insists we should call it the Great Cosmic Practical Joke. I suppose both descriptions are accurate. The galaxy is unrecognizable from what it was just 2 years ago. Not physically. The stars haven't moved. The planets still orbit their suns, and space is still mostly empty. But the connections between worlds, the relationships between species, the very idea of what civilization means, all of that has changed. We succeeded beyond our wildest hopes and in ways we never expected. The Galactic Empire didn't fall, with violence and chaos, It transformed, evolved, became something better. The old guard adapted. The oppressed found their voices. The fearful discovered courage. But perhaps the most remarkable thing is what we learned about ourselves. Humanity set out to prevent the formation of aggressive empires, and in doing so, we discovered that we'd been preparing for this moment for our entire history. Every time we chose cooperation over conquest, every time we valued diversity over uniformity, every time we decided that freedom was worth the risk of chaos, we were getting ready to help an entire galaxy make the same choice. Sarah is already working on the next project, something involving teaching local space-time to maintain its own stability. She says reality is finally learning to take care of itself. I think she might be right. The monitoring stations report that fewer interventions are needed each month. The species of the galaxy are solving their own problems, building their own solutions, creating their own impossible technologies through the simple process of working together. Tomorrow, I head home to Earth for the first time in 3 years. The Cooperation Council has unanimously voted that humanity should take a step back, let the galaxy run itself for a while. We've done our job. But knowing humans, I doubt we'll stay quiet for long. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of known space, there are probably other galaxies, other empires, other species who haven't yet discovered that cooperation works better than conquest. And when they're ready, when the time is right, when the universe needs another gentle push towards something better, well, humans have always been pretty good at showing up exactly when we're needed. End log.